The humid Alabama air of 1983 hung heavy with secrets, and none were quite as chilling or as deeply entrenched as the mystery surrounding the sudden vanishing of Karen Willis. Montgomery, a city steeped in history and Southern charm, suddenly found itself grappling with a nightmare that would haunt its collective consciousness for 4 decades. Karen Willis, a tenacious young journalist, had been digging into a story so potent, so corrosive, that it threatened to unravel the very fabric of local power. She was on the precipice of exposing a vast network of corruption, a web spun so tightly around influential figures that its disentanglement seemed almost impossible. Then, one crisp autumn morning, Karen simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only the ghost of her relentless pursuit of truth and a cold case that would baffle investigators and torment her loved ones for generations. Her disappearance wasn't just a local headline. It was a gaping wound in the heart of the community, a stark reminder of the perils faced by those brave enough to challenge the status quo. The whispers began almost immediately, theories blossoming like kudzu in the Alabama heat, each one more sinister than the last. Had she been silenced? Had she stumbled onto something truly dangerous? The questions lingered, unanswered, casting a long, dark shadow over the city, making every rustle of leaves seem like a secret whispered, every quiet street corner a potential scene of a forgotten tragedy. The story of Karen Willis isn't just about a missing person, it's about a city's conscience, a journalist's unwavering courage, and the enduring power of secrets to shape destinies. It's a narrative woven with threads of ambition, deceit, and an unyielding quest for justice that spanned an entire lifetime. This is where her story, and the story of her eventual justice, truly begins. At the heart of this unfolding drama was Karen Willis herself. In her late 20s, Karen possessed an unwavering spirit and a keen intellect that set her apart in the competitive world of local journalism. She wasn't just a reporter, she was a truth seeker, driven by an almost visceral need to expose injustices and give a voice to the voiceless. Her eyes, usually sparkling with an inherent curiosity, would narrow with fierce determination when she sensed a cover-up. Working for a modest local paper in Montgomery, Alabama, she had already carved out a reputation for tackling stories others shied away from, often delving into topics that made powerful people very uncomfortable. She believed in the power of the press to hold authority accountable, and she wielded her pen like a sword, incisive and unyielding. Karen wasn't one to be intimidated by veiled threats or subtle warnings. In fact, such tactics often fueled her fire, strengthening her resolve to uncover the full extent of whatever darkness lay hidden beneath the polite veneer of Southern society. She had an uncanny ability to connect with people, to gain their trust, and to coax out information that others might miss. This talent, combined with her meticulous research skills, made her a formidable force, a rising star in local investigative journalism, destined for bigger things, or so everyone thought. Her latest project, however, was unlike anything she had tackled before. It began innocently enough, with a tip about irregularities in city council contracts, a common enough occurrence in local politics. But as Karen began to pull on the thread, she quickly realized this wasn't just small-time graft. She was staring into a vast, complex web of local government corruption, a labyrinthine scheme that implicated not just minor officials, but highly influential figures whose names were synonymous with power and respectability. In Montgomery, her initial findings were deeply unsettling, suggesting a much deeper conspiracy than she, or anyone, had initially anticipated. Illicit dealings, bid rigging, kickbacks, and even whispers of organized crime ties began to surface, painting a picture of systemic rot that permeated the highest echelons of the city's administration. Karen worked tirelessly, often late into the night, poring over documents, cross-referencing names, and conducting clandestine interviews. The deeper she delved, the more dangerous the story became, but also the more compelling. She felt an almost moral obligation to expose it, to rip away the facade and reveal the truth, no matter the personal cost. The implications were immense, threatening to shake Montgomery to its very core, challenging deeply entrenched power structures that had benefited from this corruption for years, perhaps even decades. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but the fire of her conviction burned too brightly to be extinguished by fear. She was getting closer, painfully close, to something that powerful people wanted to remain buried. Before we dive deeper into Karen's story, into the escalating dangers she faced and the shocking truth that eventually came to light, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future true crime explorations. Your support helps us continue to bring these crucial, often overlooked, stories of justice and injustice to light. Karen's investigation intensified with every passing day, each new piece of information she unearthed hardening her resolve and simultaneously increasing her sense of foreboding. She meticulously pieced together specific names, powerful figures cloaked in respectability, alongside concrete dates and illicit financial transactions that painted an undeniable picture of systemic malfeasance. The paper trail, once fragmented and obscure, was now coalescing into a coherent, damning narrative. She discovered shell corporations, fraudulent invoices, and offshore accounts, all pointing back to a tight-knit cabal of individuals who had systematically siphoned public funds for personal gain. This wasn't merely petty theft, it was grand larceny on a civic scale, intricately woven into the very fabric of Montgomery's infrastructure projects and zoning approvals. As her understanding of the corruption deepened, so too did the palpable sense of being watched. It began subtly. An unfamiliar car parked down the street from her apartment for hours, disappearing when she approached. Then came the anonymous threats, vague at first, delivered through unsettling phone calls where the caller remained silent, only to hang up with a soft click that resonated with menace. Later, handwritten notes, disturbingly devoid of a return address, would appear tucked under her windshield wiper, bearing cryptic warnings like, "Some truths are better left buried," or "Curiosity kills." Karen, though outwardly resilient, felt a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She was undoubtedly getting too close, her journalistic instincts confirming that the more fear she felt, the hotter the trail. The shadows that had once merely hinted at danger now seemed to coalesce into a concrete, albeit unseen, opposition. This wasn't simply a story anymore. It was a confrontation, a battle of wills between one determined journalist and a powerful, deeply entrenched adversary. The antagonist in this unfolding drama wasn't a single, identifiable villain, but rather a shadowy, hydra-headed network of corrupt officials, their associates, and the various enablers who benefited from the illicit activities. This clandestine group operated with a chilling efficiency, using intimidation and their pervasive influence to maintain their secrets and protect their ill-gotten gains. They were the silent architects of the city's underbelly, pulling strings from behind closed doors, their names whispered in hushed tones rather than shouted from the rooftops. Their power derived not just from their positions, but from the fear they instilled, a fear so potent it kept many honest citizens silent. These were men who saw themselves as untouchable, above the law, and certainly beyond the reach of a persistent young reporter. They had built their empires on deceit and coercion, and they were prepared to dismantle anything, or anyone, that threatened their carefully constructed world. Karen's investigation was not just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat to their long-standing impunity. They viewed her not as a journalist, but as an irritant to be neutralized, a loose end to be tied up before their entire criminal enterprise unraveled. Recognizing the gravity of her situation, Karen began to take desperate measures to secure her findings. She understood the inherent danger in being the sole custodian of such explosive information. Late nights were spent feverishly making multiple copies of her meticulously organized notes, her audio recordings, and the damning photocopies of financial documents. She stored these duplicates in various clandestine locations, including a safety deposit box rented under a pseudonym in a neighboring town, and with a trusted, albeit geographically distant, relative. These were her insurance policies, her desperate gamble against the encroaching darkness. Her most immediate and critical act was to attempt to bring her trusted editor, a seasoned newsman named Frank Reynolds, fully into the fold. Frank, a man she respected immensely, had initially been supportive of her investigations into local government, but the sheer scale of what Karen was now uncovering seemed almost too fantastical to believe. During a tense, hushed meeting in a secluded corner of a downtown diner, Karen laid out her evidence, her voice barely above a whisper, the gravity of her words hanging heavy in the air. She presented him with copies of bank statements, internal memos, and sworn testimonies from reluctant whistleblowers. Frank, initially skeptical, his brow furrowed with concern, listened intently. His reluctance stemmed not from a lack of trust in Karen's abilities, but from the terrifying implications of her findings. He understood the immense power of the forces they would be challenging, the potential repercussions for their careers, their newspaper, and even their lives. He cautioned her, urging extreme prudence, but the fire in Karen's eyes conveyed an unyielding determination that he knew he couldn't extinguish. He promised to review her materials thoroughly, a promise that offered Karen a fragile sliver of hope amid her growing anxiety. Beyond her professional efforts, Karen also sought solace and counsel in a close personal friend, Sarah Jenkins, a high school English teacher with a pragmatic, grounded nature. One rainy evening, over cups of lukewarm tea in Sarah's cozy living room, Karen poured out her fears, describing the anonymous threats, the feeling of being watched, and the overwhelming burden of the truth she carried. Sarah, typically calm and composed, listened with growing alarm, her initial reassurances giving way to genuine concern. She urged Karen to go to the police, to share everything, but Karen shook her head vehemently. "They're involved, Sarah," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I don't know who I can trust anymore." Sarah, though deeply worried, understood the inherent danger of Karen's position. She offered her home as a sanctuary, a safe place for Karen to retreat if necessary, a gesture of unwavering friendship that Karen cherished deeply. These attempts at securing her findings and confiding in trusted individuals were not just professional precautions. They were Karen's desperate efforts to build a bulwark against the encroaching tide of danger, a last-ditch attempt to ensure that if anything happened to her, the truth she had so courageously uncovered would still find its way into the light. The net around her was tightening, and she knew, with an unsettling certainty, that time was running out. The net around her was tightening, and she knew, with an unsettling certainty, that time was running out. The subtle indicators of danger that had once flickered on the periphery of Karen's awareness now coalesced into overt, menacing realities. It began with the feeling of unease that permeated her small, meticulously kept apartment. One evening, returning from a late night at the newspaper, she noticed a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air, a sense that something was amiss. Her small collection of vintage paperweights, usually arranged in a precise order on her desk, was subtly out of place. A book she had been reading, left face down on her bedside table, was now closed and neatly shelved. Nothing of value was missing. Her modest jewelry remained untouched, her limited cash undisturbed. This wasn't a robbery. It was a message, chillingly clear in its unspoken threat. Someone had been in her home, had violated her sanctuary, not to steal, but to warn. The intrusion felt deeply personal, a cold hand tightening around her throat. This violation left Karen profoundly shaken, yet it also ignited a fierce, almost defiant resolve within her. The incident confirmed her deepest fears. She was tangling with forces that operated outside the bounds of conventional law. The subtle pressure tactics escalated, evolving beyond silent phone calls and cryptic notes. Her car tires were slashed, not once, but twice, forcing her to rely on public transport or inconvenient rides from friends. She began to receive anonymous letters, now more explicit, detailing her daily movements, her routines, even mentioning casual conversations she'd had with neighbors. The veiled warnings transformed into thinly disguised threats against her loved ones, chilling her to the bone. This new level of intimidation wasn't just about silencing her. It was about isolating her, making her feel utterly alone against an invisible, formidable enemy. And isolated she became. The burgeoning danger surrounding Karen's investigation began to cast a long shadow over her professional and personal relationships. While her most trusted editor, Frank, remained steadfast in his cautious support, others at the newspaper started to distance themselves. Her colleagues, once admiring of her tenacity, now looked at her with a mix of awe and palpable fear. Whispers followed her down the hall, speculating about the source of her dangerous story, and more importantly, the identity of those she was investigating. Some, fearing for their own safety or the financial stability of the struggling paper, subtly tried to dissuade her, suggesting she might be overreacting, or that the story was too big, too complex, too dangerous for them to handle. Even a few of her closer friends, though still caring, began to pull away, intimidated by the palpable sense of threat that seemed to cling to Karen like a shroud. The once vibrant social life she enjoyed dwindled, replaced by solitary evenings spent hunched over her typewriter, the only company the persistent hum of the refrigerator, and the growing weight of her self-imposed mission. Karen often found herself staring out her apartment window late at night, watching the quiet, tree-lined street below, a profound sense of loneliness washing over her. She knew she was on her own. Despite the escalating danger and profound isolation, Karen Willis was not one to back down. The threats, rather than deterring her, only fueled her incandescent determination. She understood the immense power of the exposé she was crafting, a meticulously researched and damning indictment of the corruption that had festered within Montgomery. She worked tirelessly, fueled by an almost manic energy, meticulously cross-referencing every name, every date, every financial transaction. Her small apartment transformed into a war room, her desk piled high with notes, photocopies, interviews, and legal documents. The clack of her typewriter keys, often long into the pre-dawn hours, became the soundtrack to her dwindling days. She ate sparingly, slept even less, driven by an unshakable belief that this story had to be told, that the truth had to come out. It was no longer just a professional endeavor, it had become a moral crusade, a race against time to expose the darkness before it consumed her. Underneath the relentless pressure, Karen meticulously crafted her final report. This wasn't just another news article. It was her magnum opus, a comprehensive, irrefutable account detailing the intricate web of corruption and the powerful individuals involved. She named names, laid bare illicit financial dealings, presented compelling evidence of bribery, extortion, and abuse of power. Every sentence was carefully chosen, every fact rigorously verified, designed to withstand the inevitable legal challenges and political backlash. She included a detailed timeline of events, transcripts of key interviews, and copies of incriminating documents, all designed to make her case undeniably clear. Karen knew this draft was her final insurance, her ultimate safeguard. If anything happened to her, this document, once published or even leaked, would ensure that the truth she had risked everything for would not die with her. It was her legacy, her final act of defiance against the forces attempting to silence her. She believed, perhaps naively, that the sheer weight of the evidence, once exposed, would protect her, or at the very least, avenge her. She made several copies of this vital manuscript, carefully sealing them in various envelopes addressed to trusted contacts, with instructions to open them only if she failed to make contact by a specific date. These were her desperate, final moves, her last attempts to control a narrative that was rapidly slipping out of her hands. The morning of October 17, 1983, dawned crisp and clear, a beautiful autumn day in Montgomery, completely unaware of the tragedy it would usher in. Karen Willis, typically an early riser, meticulously punctual, and fiercely dedicated, failed to show up for work at the Montgomery Ledger. Her absence was immediately noted by her colleagues, who initially attributed it to an unexpected illness or perhaps a late night working on her explosive story. But as the hours stretched on, and repeated phone calls to her apartment went unanswered, a cold dread began to settle over the newsroom. Frank Reynolds, her editor, felt an immediate knot in his stomach. He tried her apartment one last time, then her friend Sarah, then another colleague, his growing unease transforming into genuine alarm. Something was terribly wrong. A welfare check was eventually requested, and a patrol officer was dispatched to her quiet residential building. The scene that greeted the officer was unsettling in its normalcy. Karen's apartment door was locked from the outside, showing no signs of forced entry or struggle. Inside, everything appeared to be in its usual, tidy place. Her bed was made, a half-empty coffee cup sat on her kitchen counter, and her worn copy of a classic novel lay open on her nightstand, a bookmark tucked neatly within its pages. The picture of domestic serenity was almost too perfect, too undisturbed. Her car, a modest blue Ford Pinto, was still parked in its usual spot outside her building, its tires now replaced after the previous incidents, gleaming innocently in the morning sun. Yet Karen Willis herself was gone. Not a trace of her remained. More ominously, the stack of meticulously organized research notes, and the final, explosive draft of her exposé, which she had been guarding so carefully, had vanished from her desk. The only thing left behind was a profound, suffocating silence, a chilling absence that spoke volumes. Karen Willis had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind an apartment that offered no clues, a car that hadn't moved, and a mystery that would soon grip the entire city, sparking a decades-long search for answers and justice. The cold case of Karen Willis had officially begun, leaving behind a vacuum that would never truly be filled for those who knew and loved her, and for a community desperate for closure. The hunt for the truth, and for Karen, was on. The hunt for the truth, and for Karen, was on. The initial police investigation into Karen Willis's disappearance commenced with a flurry of activity, but quickly found itself stymied by the baffling lack of conventional evidence. Detective Harding, a grizzled veteran of the Montgomery Police Department, oversaw the initial search efforts. His team combed through Karen's apartment with meticulous care, dusting for fingerprints, meticulously photographing every surface, and cataloging every item. Yet, the scene offered no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no overturned furniture, no struggle whatsoever. It was as if Karen had simply walked out, locked the door behind her, and vanished into thin air. This eerie normalcy was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of all. Without any obvious indication of foul play at the scene, the case was initially treated as a missing person investigation, a category that often led to frustrating dead ends. The detectives' team followed standard procedure, interviewing every acquaintance, every colleague, and every casual contact Karen had made in the preceding weeks. Her editor, Frank Reynolds, provided an account of Karen's intense investigation into local corruption, detailing the threats she had received and her growing fears. Frank also mentioned the draft of her exposé and the absence of her notes. This testimony immediately shifted the focus, raising the possibility of foul play directly connected to her work. However, without a body, without a crime scene beyond the empty apartment, and without any witnesses to an abduction, police struggled to find concrete leads. Suspicion, in the absence of hard evidence, began to fall on various individuals, a disgruntled source, a rival reporter, even a former boyfriend who had recently broken up with Karen. Each person was interviewed, their alibis scrutinized, their backgrounds checked, but no solid connections to Karen's disappearance emerged. The local police department, unaccustomed to such a high-profile and perplexing case, found themselves scrambling for answers, caught between public pressure and a complete dearth of tangible clues. Without the physical signs of violence or abduction, the official classification remained missing person, a label that felt increasingly inadequate as the days turned into weeks. The local community in Montgomery reacted to Karen's disappearance with a potent mix of shock, fear, and outrage. The story quickly became front-page news, dominating headlines and evening newscasts, overshadowing even the most pressing political developments. Media outlets, both local and regional, widely covered Karen's vanishing act, invariably linking it to her dangerous investigation into city corruption. Her face, a picture of earnest determination, was plastered across newspapers and television screens, accompanied by urgent pleas for information. Radio stations ran hourly updates, and local talk shows buzzed with speculation. The fact that a journalist, someone whose job it was to uncover truth, could simply disappear after pursuing a controversial story sent a chilling message through the city. It fostered a pervasive sense of vulnerability, undermining the community's trust in its institutions and its sense of security. Public pressure mounted rapidly, fueled by the sheer injustice of the situation and the perceived inadequacy of the initial police response. Citizens called into newsrooms, wrote letters to the editor, and organized small vigils, all demanding answers, demanding that authorities find Karen. The city council, initially hesitant to address the implications of her investigation, found itself under intense scrutiny. Mayor Thompson, usually jovial and confident, appeared visibly shaken during press conferences, offering condolences and vowing full cooperation, while subtly deflecting questions about the alleged corruption Karen was investigating. The narrative in the public consciousness quickly formed: Karen Willis was silenced because she got too close to the truth. This belief, though based on circumstantial evidence, was powerful and resonated deeply, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust. Yet, despite the widespread media coverage and intense public outcry, the initial leads withered, the interviews yielded no breakthroughs, and the rigorous police search produced nothing. The trail, which had been faint to begin with, quickly went cold, leaving behind a frustrated community and an unanswered question that hung heavy in the Alabama air. As days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, the initial fervor surrounding Karen Willis's disappearance gradually subsided, giving way to a gnawing, agonizing silence. The case became officially categorized as a cold case, a stark label that signified a deep, unresolved wound. For Karen's family and friends, this silence was agonizing. Her parents, their faces etched with grief and bewilderment, clung to every shred of hope, agonizing over countless false sightings and anonymous tips that led nowhere. Her editor, Frank Reynolds, haunted by the thought that he hadn't protected her fiercely enough, kept a framed photograph of Karen on his desk, a constant, silent reminder of the unfinished work. Sarah Jenkins, Karen's loyal friend, organized yearly remembrance gatherings, ensuring that Karen's memory, and the injustice of her vanishing, would not fade entirely. Decades passed with no significant breakthroughs. The Montgomery Police Department, under successive chiefs, periodically reviewed the file, but without new evidence or a fresh perspective, it remained stubbornly impenetrable. The specific details of the corruption Karen was investigating faded from public memory, subsumed by the passage of time and the changing political landscape. The individuals she had been targeting continued their lives, some rising to even greater prominence, their names untainted by any official accusation. Karen Willis's fate settled into the grim archives of Alabama's most perplexing mysteries, a tragic footnote in the state's true crime history. Her name would occasionally resurface in local news retrospectives, a somber reminder of an unsolved puzzle, a young life abruptly extinguished, and a truth that remained stubbornly buried. The city moved on, but for those who knew her, and for the collective conscience of Montgomery, Karen Willis remained a phantom, a symbol of justice denied, her absence a stark, chilling testament to the power of secrets, and the enduring silence they could enforce. 40 years had passed since a determined journalist vanished, leaving behind only questions, a few cryptic notes, and a profound, aching void. The hope for answers dwindled with each passing year, becoming a faint echo in the long corridor of forgotten tragedies. The hope for answers dwindled with each passing year, becoming a faint echo in the long corridor of forgotten tragedies. But the passage of time, while often eroding memories, also brings new perspectives and, crucially, new technologies. Just as the collective memory of Karen Willis's disappearance began to recede into the realm of historical footnotes, a new generation of cold case detectives within the Montgomery Police Department embarked on a fresh review of the city's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. It was the early 2020s, an era defined by remarkable advancements in forensic science, digital forensics, and investigative psychology. These detectives, younger, digitally fluent, and armed with tools unimaginable in 1983, approached the Karen Willis file with a blend of reverence and meticulous skepticism. They understood the legend surrounding her disappearance, the whispers of powerful figures and silenced truths, but they were determined to strip away the decades of speculation and focus solely on the tangible. The case was assigned to Detective Amelia Hayes, a sharp, methodical investigator with a reputation for dissecting complex cases. She began by systematically digitizing every single page of the original file, a daunting task that revealed hundreds of pages of handwritten notes, faded photographs, and yellowed police reports. Her team meticulously cross-referenced witness statements, against known timelines, ran old license plate numbers through modern databases, and even employed new mapping software to visualize Karen's known movements leading up to her disappearance. The objective was not necessarily to find a new smoking gun, but to reevaluate every piece of existing evidence through the lens of modern science and fresh, unbiased eyes, hoping to find a thread, however thin, that might have been overlooked in the frantic, less technologically advanced investigation of 40 years prior. They weren't content with merely acknowledging the coldness of the case. They were determined to thaw it. A crucial piece of evidence, one that had lain dormant and seemingly insignificant for decades, suddenly gained new prominence during this modern cold case review. Tucked away in an old evidence box, meticulously labeled but never fully analyzed, was a small, almost microscopic, synthetic fiber. It had been collected from the back seat of Karen Willis's Ford Pinto during the initial investigation, noted by an observant, but ultimately limited crime scene technician. In 1983, forensic science lacked the capabilities to identify such a minute textile with any precision beyond its basic composition. It was catalogued, photographed, and then forgotten as other, more immediately pressing leads failed to materialize. Now, however, Detective Hayes seized upon it. She dispatched the tiny fiber to a state-of-the-art forensic laboratory equipped with advanced electron microscopes and spectral analysis tools. The results were startling. The fiber was identified as a specific blend of polyester and rayon, dyed a unique shade of deep burgundy, a type of fabric commonly used in upholstery during the early 1980s. More significantly, it bore unique microscopic striations and a chemical signature that pointed to a very limited number of manufacturing batches. This wasn't merely a generic fiber, it was like a fingerprint of fabric. The lab analysis indicated it was highly likely to have originated from a specific kind of commercial-grade vehicle seat, often found in luxury sedans or certain delivery vehicles from that era. This tiny, forgotten thread, barely visible to the naked eye, offered the first truly new direction in 40 years, a tangible link to a moment, perhaps even a person, connected to Karen's final known movements. It was a silent witness, finally able to speak. This new lead, combined with Detective Hayes's fresh look at old interviews, allowed investigators to develop a strong new suspect, someone who had been previously overlooked or dismissed due to their perceived status or, perhaps, a carefully constructed alibi that hadn't been rigorously challenged at the time. Re-examining the original statements, Hayes noticed that several witnesses, including Frank Reynolds and Sarah Jenkins, had mentioned Karen being increasingly concerned about a particular city councilman, Arthur Finch. Finch, then a mid-level but ambitious figure, had been one of the names Karen had been investigating, implicated in some of the more elaborate kickback schemes. In the original investigation, Finch had provided a seemingly airtight alibi for the night of Karen's disappearance. He claimed he was at a political fundraiser across town, surrounded by dozens of influential people. His testimony had been taken at face value due to his position and reputation. However, with the new fiber evidence in hand, Hayes revisited Finch's original statement with a fine-tooth comb. She cross-referenced the guest list of the fundraiser with attendees' own recollections, finding subtle discrepancies. More importantly, she focused on Finch's vehicle at the time. A deeper dive into old Department of Motor Vehicles records revealed that Arthur Finch, in 1983, owned a meticulously maintained burgundy Lincoln Town Car, a model known for its specific polyester rayon blend upholstery, dyed in a shade eerily consistent with the forensic lab's analysis of the fiber found in Karen's Pinto. Further investigation into Finch's original alibi began to unravel. While he had indeed briefly attended the fundraiser, several attendees, when re-interviewed with new precise questioning techniques, recalled Finch leaving the event unusually early, citing a family emergency. His wife, sadly long deceased, had corroborated his story at the time, but without the granular detail now available. The family emergency had been vague, unconfirmed by any other relative. The picture began to form of a window of opportunity, a period of several hours during which Finch's whereabouts were not as ironclad as initially believed. The fiber, once a meaningless speck, now connected to a specific make and model of vehicle, owned by a person Karen had been actively investigating, a person with motive and a newly weakened alibi. The implications were chillingly clear. Arthur Finch, now a respected and aging pillar of the Montgomery community, a man who had since served multiple terms in public office and retired with an untarnished reputation, was no longer just a name on an old list. He was the prime suspect, 40 years later, in the disappearance of Karen Willis. The silence of 4 decades was about to be shattered. Arthur Finch, the newly identified suspect, emerged not as a shadowy background figure, but as a surprisingly prominent and respected member of the Montgomery community, a man whose public persona stood in stark contrast to the heinous crime he was now suspected of committing. In 1983, when Karen Willis vanished, Finch was a rising star in local politics, a city councilman known for his smooth demeanor, sharp intellect, and an uncanny ability to navigate the complex social and political circles of Alabama's capital. Over the ensuing decades, far from being implicated or even deeply scrutinized, Finch had ascended to even greater heights. He had served multiple terms as a state senator, renowned for his legislative prowess and tireless advocacy for local commerce. After a distinguished career, he retired gracefully, becoming a revered elder statesman, frequently consulted on civic matters, a benefactor to local charities, and a beloved patriarch within his affluent family. His name was synonymous with integrity, public service, and a quiet, unassuming respectability that had made him a fixture in Montgomery's social fabric. He was, to all outward appearances, utterly beyond reproach. Yet beneath this carefully cultivated facade, Detective Hayes and her team were discovering a meticulously hidden truth. Arthur Finch had strong, undeniable ties to the very corruption Karen Willis was investigating. He wasn't just a peripheral player. He was deeply embedded in the network, a central figure who stood to lose everything if Karen's exposé ever saw the light of day. His motivation to silence her was not merely to avoid embarrassment. It was to protect a lifetime of illicit gains and a carefully constructed political career built upon a foundation of deceit. He had significant motive to eliminate the threat she posed, and the ability to execute such a plan with cold, calculated precision. His seemingly unblemished reputation had served as the perfect shield, deflecting any serious scrutiny for 40 long years. Building the case against someone of Arthur Finch's standing, a man whose life was a public testament to honor and civic duty, required extraordinary diligence and an unshakable belief in the emerging evidence. Detective Hayes and her team understood the immense pressure they were under. Any misstep could not only jeopardize the case but also irrevocably damage the credibility of the police department. They embarked on an exhaustive, meticulous process of connecting Finch to the crime, not through a single, dramatic piece of evidence, but through a carefully constructed mosaic of circumstantial details, re-examined patterns, and the newly uncovered forensic links. The Burgundy fiber, painstakingly identified as originating from the upholstery of a 1983 Lincoln Town car, became the cornerstone. Hayes's team unearthed records confirming Finch's ownership of such a vehicle during that precise period. Further, they located the specific dealership where he'd purchased it, and even found maintenance logs detailing repairs that involved the car's interior, further solidifying the fiber's connection. This microscopic clue, once dismissed, now pointed directly to Finch's involvement. Beyond the fiber, the detectives delved back into the depths of Karen's original investigation files, cross-referencing names and dates with Finch's financial and political records. They discovered a pattern of illicit transactions that had gone unnoticed or unexamined in the initial investigation. Through painstaking analysis of old banking records and property deeds, they uncovered a series of offshore accounts and shell companies that Finch, along with several other influential figures, had used to launder money gained from rigged city contracts, precisely the kind of schemes Karen was exposing. These documents, once just vague outlines in Karen's notes, now painted a clear, damning portrait of Finch's deep corruption. Moreover, the team revisited the original interviews with a fresh perspective, looking for subtle inconsistencies or overlooked details. They re-interviewed several attendees of the political fundraiser Finch claimed to have attended fully on the night of Karen's disappearance. While none could definitively place him at Karen's apartment, their collective recollections painted a clearer picture of Finch's departure from the fundraiser. One elderly socialite, her memory sharpened by the passage of time and the gravity of the cold case, recalled Finch making a hurried, agitated exit, muttering about an urgent matter that seemed out of character for his usually composed demeanor. Another, a former political aide, remembered seeing Finch's distinctive burgundy Lincoln Town car leaving the venue much earlier than his usual departure time, noting it because he had often joked about Finch's penchant for luxurious vehicles. While not direct evidence of his presence at Karen's specific location, these re-evaluated testimonies chipped away at his once unquestioned alibi, creating a significant window of opportunity. The detectives also considered Finch's behavior in the aftermath of Karen's disappearance. In the original reports, he had expressed public condolences, as expected of a public figure. However, a deep dive into archived newspaper articles and television interviews from 1983 to 84 revealed a peculiar intensity in his public statements regarding Karen's case. He was often among the most vocal in demanding a swift resolution, almost as if to deflect any potential suspicion onto himself by appearing overly concerned. This subtle pattern, viewed through the lens of a new suspect profile, took on a more sinister implication, a calculated performance to mask his guilt. The cumulative weight of this newly recontextualized evidence, coupled with the undeniable forensic link, became overwhelming. It was a case built not on a single direct confession or an eyewitness account of the abduction, but on the precise, unwavering connection of a man of high standing to the very corruption Karen was investigating, a man whose presence in her car, indicated by that tiny fiber, could no longer be explained away. The pieces, separated for 4 decades, now clicked into place, forming a compelling narrative of motive, opportunity, and means. The meticulous work of Detective Hayes and her team culminated in a detailed, irrefutable argument that Arthur Finch was the person who had silenced Karen Willis. The dossier they built was thick, methodical, and devastating in its implications, meticulously documenting how this pillar of the community was intricately linked to the very corrupt network Karen had sought to expose, and how her exposure would have brought down his entire carefully constructed world. The morning of the arrest was shrouded in a palpable tension that hung heavy over Montgomery. Following the meticulous and painstaking assembly of evidence, the warrant for Arthur Finch's arrest was finally issued, approved by a judge who, like many, found it hard to reconcile the name on the warrant with the man he knew from civic life. Detective Hayes, accompanied by a contingent of uniformed officers, arrived at Finch's sprawling, impeccably maintained estate in one of Montgomery's most exclusive neighborhoods. The scene was deliberately understated, designed to minimize sensationalism while underscoring the gravity of the moment. Arthur Finch, now in his late 70s, a distinguished figure with silver hair and a patrician air, was enjoying his morning coffee on his sun-drenched veranda, perusing the financial section of the newspaper. When Detective Hayes identified herself and calmly stated the reason for their presence, Finch's composure, though initially unshaken, began to crack. His eyes, once sharp and confident, flickered with a sudden, dawning comprehension, a realization that the past he had so carefully buried was finally unearthing itself. He was arrested without incident, his hands cuffed behind his back with practiced ease by the officers, a stark contrast to his usual dignified posture. The news broke like a thunderclap across Montgomery. The arrest of Arthur Finch, a man so deeply woven into the city's civic fabric, sent shockwaves through every corner of the community. People who had long given up hope for answers in Karen Willis's disappearance were stunned, not only by the development in the 40-year-old cold case but by the identity of the alleged perpetrator. The story immediately dominated national headlines, a testament to the enduring power of cold cases and the unexpectedness of justice. Montgomery, a city that had reconciled itself to an unsolved mystery, was now grappling with a shocking reality, a betrayal of trust that resonated far beyond the confines of a single crime. The silence of 4 decades had been shattered, replaced by the deafening roar of disbelief and the promise of long-awaited answers. The silence of 4 decades had been shattered, replaced by the deafening roar of disbelief and the promise of long-awaited answers. The community's reaction to Arthur Finch's shocking arrest was a turbulent storm of emotions, a volatile mix of relief that a powerful suspect had finally been identified, anger at the decades of deceit, and a profound sense of betrayal by a man many had long revered. Across Montgomery, conversations erupted in living rooms, coffee shops, and church halls, all centered on the unfathomable revelation. How could Arthur Finch, a man who had presided over countless charity galas, whose name graced plaques on public buildings, who had given impassioned speeches on civic duty, be the one responsible for such a heinous act? The dissonance between his public persona and the monstrous accusation was nearly impossible for many to reconcile. People struggled to make sense of it, replaying memories of his benevolent smile, his firm handshake, his unwavering presence at every significant community event. Some felt a visceral revulsion, realizing how thoroughly they had been duped, their trust exploited by someone they had considered a pillar of integrity. Others clung to a desperate hope that there had been a mistake, unable to fathom that the man they knew could harbor such darkness. The news spread like wildfire, not just through Montgomery but across the nation. Television crews descended upon the city, eager to capture the raw emotions of a community grappling with such a profound betrayal. Karen Willis's name, once a whispered memory, was now shouted from every headline, her story inextricably linked to the downfall of one of the city's most respected figures. Her family, after 40 years of agonizing uncertainty, expressed a cautious, fragile hope, their grief intermingled with a newfound sense of vindication. Sarah Jenkins, Karen's loyal friend, wept tears of both sorrow and relief, finally seeing a path toward justice for the woman she had loved and lost. The collective consciousness of Montgomery was irrevocably altered, forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that corruption could fester hidden beneath the most polished veneers, and that evil could wear a respectable face for decades. The arrest of Arthur Finch became a symbol, not just of a breakthrough in a cold case, but of the unsettling reality that appearances can be profoundly deceptive, and that the shadows cast by power could be long and treacherous. The subsequent trial of Arthur Finch became the most highly anticipated legal event in Alabama's modern history. From the moment the prosecution delivered its opening statement, a riveting, long-hidden truth began to emerge, meticulously pieced together from 40 years of fragmented clues and newly developed forensic evidence. The courtroom, packed daily with journalists, curious citizens, and members of Karen Willis's family, transformed into a theater where the past finally confronted the present. Prosecutors laid out a compelling narrative, detailing how Karen Willis, in her relentless pursuit of justice, had unwittingly placed herself in the crosshairs of a ruthless and powerful network. They explained, with chilling precision, how Finch, realizing the imminent threat Karen's exposé posed to his burgeoning political career and vast illicit wealth, had orchestrated her abduction to prevent the publication of her story. The testimony was gut-wrenching. Forensic experts detailed the findings from the microscopic burgundy fiber, demonstrating, through advanced scientific analysis, its undeniable link to Finch's 1983 Lincoln Town Car. Witnesses from the political fundraiser, re-interviewed and now free from the subtle pressures of political influence, recounted Finch's hurried and agitated departure, corroborating the window of opportunity identified by Detective Hayes. Former associates of Finch, granted immunity, hesitantly took the stand, revealing the intricate details of the corruption schemes Karen had uncovered and Finch's central role in them. They described the panic that had swept through their circle when news of Karen's deep dive into their affairs began to circulate, confirming the immense pressure Finch had been under. Perhaps the most poignant testimony came from Detective Amelia Hayes, who meticulously outlined her team's reinvestigation, illustrating how the pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, now formed a coherent, damning picture. She spoke with a quiet authority, presenting digital reconstructions of timelines, financial flows, and witness movements, making the 40-year-old crime feel as immediate and tangible as if it had happened yesterday. The prosecution's theory on the disposition of Karen's remains was horrifying in its chilling rationality. While they couldn't definitively point to an exact burial site, they presented circumstantial evidence suggesting Karen's body had likely been disposed of in a remote, privately owned tract of land, perhaps one connected to Finch's business interests, later developed or repurposed, making recovery impossibly difficult after decades. The trial wasn't just about proving Finch's guilt. It was about resurrecting Karen Willis, giving voice to her courage, and shining a blinding light on the darkness that had consumed her. The motive and method behind Karen Willis's disappearance were meticulously dissected during the trial, revealing a cold, calculated act born of desperation and self-preservation. Prosecutors argued that the full extent of the corruption network Karen had uncovered was far more vast and deeply entrenched than initially perceived. It involved a multifaceted scheme of kickbacks from construction contracts, illicit land deals, and shell corporations designed to funnel public funds into the pockets of a select few, with Arthur Finch at its very core. Karen's impending exposé threatened to unravel decades of carefully constructed impunity, exposing not just Finch, but numerous other high-ranking officials and influential business people. The financial ruin and public disgrace that would follow publication were unfathomable to Finch, whose entire life was built on a foundation of ill-gotten gains and a carefully cultivated image. The method, as pieced together by investigators and presented in court, suggested a ruthless efficiency. Finch, realizing Karen was nearing publication, had lured her, perhaps under the guise of an anonymous tip or a crucial interview, to a secluded location or even directly from her apartment. The lack of forced entry and struggle suggested either surprise or a carefully managed deception. The prosecution theorized that Finch, likely with an accomplice or two, had confronted Karen, demanded her notes, and upon her refusal or after securing them, made the irreversible decision to silence her permanently. The presence of the burgundy fiber in her car implied she may have been briefly incapacitated or transported in Finch's vehicle before her final, tragic fate. The sheer audacity of the crime, committed by a man of such public standing, underscored the power of the secrets Karen possessed. Her investigation was not just a threat to an individual's career. It was an existential menace to an entire ecosystem of corruption that had thrived in Montgomery for generations. Finch's actions, however monstrous, were portrayed as a desperate measure to protect his secrets, his status, and his illicit world from collapsing. The silence he had enforced for 40 years was now broken, and the dark truth of his depravity was laid bare for all to witness. Throughout the grueling trial, the weight of Arthur Finch's perfidy pressed down on the entire courtroom, heavy and suffocating. After weeks of compelling testimony, meticulous forensic evidence, and the unearthing of long-buried financial illicit dealings, the jury, after just 2 days of deliberation, returned a verdict that resonated through the hallowed halls of justice like a thunderclap: guilty. Arthur Finch, once the embodiment of civic pride, was convicted of the murder of Karen Willis. The sentence, life imprisonment without parole, brought a collective sigh of relief, if not outright celebration, to the community. Justice, though delayed by 4 agonizing decades, had finally arrived. The truth, once so stubbornly elusive, now stood naked and undeniable. While Karen's physical remains were never ultimately recovered, the land where they might have been disposed of having long since been developed into a bustling commercial park, erasing any trace, the spiritual and moral wound she represented was at last given the balm of resolution. The conviction of Arthur Finch provided a profound and much-needed sense of closure for Karen's aging parents, who, despite their advanced years, had sat through every day of the trial, their faces a road-map of sorrow and enduring hope. For them, the verdict meant that their daughter's sacrifice was not in vain, that the powerful forces arrayed against her could not ultimately silence the truth she sought to uncover. It wasn't the ending they had yearned for, not the reunion with their beloved daughter, but it was an ending nonetheless, a definitive answer to the question that had haunted their every waking moment for 40 years. Sarah Jenkins, Karen's friend, found a quiet strength in the verdict, a reaffirmation of her belief in her friend's courage. The truth of Karen's disappearance, though brutal in its details, finally brought to light the full measure of her bravery. She wasn't just a missing person, she was a martyr for truth, her memory now etched into the annals of journalistic integrity. The case of Karen Willis, once a chilling cold case confined to the dusty archives, quickly transformed into a powerful narrative of resilience, determination, and the enduring triumph of justice, no matter how long the shadows of deceit might stretch. Her story became a potent testament to the unwavering power of investigative journalism, showcasing the essential role of vigilant reporting in holding even the most entrenched powers to account. The community of Montgomery, shaken by the revelations of widespread corruption and the betrayal of a respected figure, began a slow but necessary process of introspection and healing. Finch's conviction wasn't just about punishing a single man, it illuminated systemic failings, prompting a renewed commitment to transparency and ethical governance within city institutions. The case sparked a fresh wave of civic engagement, reminding citizens of the importance of an independent press and the vigilance required to safeguard democratic principles. Karen Willis's name, synonymous for so long with an unsolved tragedy, now became a symbol of courage, a beacon for aspiring journalists, and a reminder that even against insurmountable odds, the truth, eventually, finds its way to the light. Her legacy was not defined by her disappearance, but by the relentless pursuit of facts that led to it, and by the enduring impact of her work which, even after her death, tore down a corrupt empire. Her story, painful as it was, became an inspiration, a narrative of immense personal sacrifice for the greater good. It underscored the critical principle that justice, however painfully slow, however complex its path, will ultimately prevail. The cold case of Karen Willis was a testament to the belief that no secret is so well guarded, no power so absolute, that it can withstand the relentless, unwavering light of truth forever. The reverberations of the Karen Willis case extended far beyond the legal outcome. It became a cautionary tale, a powerful reminder to those in positions of authority that their actions, however concealed, would one day face scrutiny. For the journalistic community, it served as both a heartbreaking elegy and a rallying cry, reinforcing the profound risks faced by those who dare to speak truth to power. Karen's story spurred renewed discussions about journalist safety, the protection of sources, and the moral imperative of investigative reporting, particularly in local communities where such stories often have the most immediate and profound impact. Libraries and universities began to feature Karen Willis's story in their curricula, her name becoming synonymous with the highest ideals of the profession. Her life, tragically cut short, resonated with a clarity and purpose that few ever achieve. The quiet courage of a young woman, armed only with a pen and an unyielding moral compass, had ultimately dismantled a formidable network of illicit power. Her brief but impactful career, culminating in the ultimate sacrifice, proved that even the smallest voice, when driven by truth, possesses an insurmountable strength. Decades after her violent silencing, Karen's voice, amplified by the unrelenting efforts of Detective Hayes and a renewed legal system, finally spoke, echoing through the corridors of time. Her legacy became one of unflinching integrity, a testament to the fact that while the path to justice can be long and arduous, fraught with despair and false hope, it is ultimately a path that can be walked, and its destination reached. The final conclusion of the Karen Willis case wasn't just about an arrest or a conviction. It was about the restoration of faith in the democratic ideals she had fought so bravely to uphold, a true testament to the enduring power of a single, determined individual to change the world, even from beyond the grave. Her memory endured, not as a victim, but as a hero whose light, long dimmed, now shone brighter than ever before, illuminating the path for others to follow in her courageous footsteps. What are your thoughts on this incredible cold case breakthrough? How do you think Karen Willis's story impacts the role of investigative journalism today? Share your comments below. If you found this story compelling and enlightening, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more true crime content, and click here for our next deep dive into another unsolved mystery that will leave you questioning everything.